The last year in South Africa has seen an upsurge of protests and public debates around issues of institutional racism, exclusion, language and culture, and their role in the lack of social cohesion, as well as questioning concepts such as reconciliation and the Rainbow Nation. In her book, Why We Are Not a Nation, Qunta deals with these issues in a frank and incisive manner. She joins us now from our Cape Town studios to tell us a little bit more about this book, Why We Are Not a Nation. Christine, it's absolutely wonderful to have you on the program. Thank you so much for being our guest.
Thank you for having me, Leanne.
Looking at some of the issues that you write about in your book, I mean, you touch on racism and inequality. What happened to South Africans and this ideal of a rainbow nation?
I think we didn't have the conversations in 1994 that we should have had. I think we thought we could move seamlessly from a colonial situation to a democracy without having those difficult conversations about power, who wields the power and who doesn't have the power, and how you transfer power from the minority to the majority.
And I mean, I know that.
So now we are at a, yeah.
I mean, you talk about the fact that there's some deeper issues that were never really properly dealt with in 1994. What do you think could have happened?
Well, look, we had a negotiated settlement, and that had both advantages and disadvantages. The question of who controls the means of production in the country, the question of who controls the economy, it's such a serious problem. And at the moment, we are focusing on political governance and the weaknesses thereof. And I think that's fine. But we don't give enough attention to the institutionalized effects of apartheid and colonialism, because we haven't dealt with that. The majority is still poor and marginalized, both culturally, physically, and in every other way, and the minority still wields significant power. And I think this is a serious risk to our future stability, and I think that's what my first essay deals with in the book. What could happen if we don't address these issues?
Yeah. I mean, and in a way, we're almost seeing it playing out now. But I mean, we're talking about, you know, some of these things that we're seeing on social media, and perhaps it's always been there, but because social media is so public and everybody gets the access to it and has a view into people's minds and their thoughts and perhaps their true feelings. I mean, how do you actually, what is the difference between participating in civil society issues and also hampering the human rights of others? Because there's a fine line there.
I think, Leanne, what the outbursts on social media with Penny Sparrow, those are really individual expressions of prejudice. And yes, they're very aggravating, and I think there should be consequences for people who do those kinds of things. But that is a symptom of the larger problem, that of institutionalized exclusion of the majority. And I identify that as the major problem in the country at the moment, along with poor political leadership. And I think if we don't resolve this issue of inequality, which is in a sense engineered inequality, we face a serious risk of social instability down the line. And my first essay deals with that.
Yeah. There's also quite an interesting part of one of the books, one of the essays in your book. You also talk about the fact that whites should voluntarily pay into a reparations fund. You go on to say that this fund should be formalized through legislation after consultation with all stakeholders, and the proceeds should target key and specific interventions that would help to pull the current but also next generation out of the jaws of poverty. Talk a bit more about this idea.
I think what we have to understand that the problem in South Africa was not racial discrimination. Over a period of 350 years, African people's land were taken violently, and that is the source of all poverty in this country. And we need to know that that is the major problem. How do we resolve that without a sort of violent uprising? is to create an opportunity that people can have to try and create restitution. And that is one of my suggestions, the reparation fund.
Yeah. There are so many suggestions and so many areas that you focus on in these essays of yours, but one that's also, I think, caught our attention is the one that, this essay that basically focuses on the politics of hair. Because hair has become a very political issue here in South Africa. And you actually compare it to Sarah Baartman. Talk to me about the relationship between the two of the two relationships there.
Well, what Africans faced, unlike other peoples who were colonized, is not only were they physically oppressed, and black consciousness, you know, I come from the black consciousness activism area, and we dealt with this, that you also had mental colonization. And part of that mental colonization is to persuade African women in particular, and well, African people as a whole, but particularly African women, that the way they look, there is something fundamentally wrong, and it's part of their inferiority that they have dark skins, full lips, curly hair. And what Ngugi says, for instance, that there's $1 billion industry based on and supported by African people who are trying to erase their Africanism. And the link between Sarah Baartman and the wearing of weaves is that Sarah Baartman's body and physical features were so denigrated, and that continues up to today. So that's the link, that there are African women who believe that the way they look is wrong, and they have to try and change that.
Yeah, such interesting, insightful essays you'll find in this book. It was launched on the 10th of May. I know, I imagine it's in bookstores around the country, and you can get a copy of that.
Yes, it's...
Christine Qunta, it's always a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your valuable time. Christine Qunta, there is a book out, Why We Are Not a Nation. It's a compilation of a lot of essays and just some understandings of the thoughts of Christine Qunta, as you heard herself, a black conscious leader who has always been there and has done so much for South Africa. Here are her views. You can get the book and enjoy reading it. All right, let's take a break. We'll have our news at 7 after this, including that breaking story of that Egyptian